Good morning from Tokyo and good evening from Washington, D.C. Greetings to everyone. It's my great pleasure to be hosting tonight's GZERO Summit key panel on sustainability. I am Robert Johnston. I'm the Managing Director for Energy, Climate, and Resources at Eurasia Group, and I'm delighted to be here. So far, our GZERO Summit agenda has already explored issues around global geopolitics, geotechnology, as well as public health and the COVID crisis. Now we turn to sustainability, building on comments from Prime Minister Suga about Japan's commitment to building a decarbonized society that he mentioned in his welcome address yesterday. Climate sustainability represents a core challenge and opportunity for businesses and governments around the world. But strategies for strengthening sustainability vary widely across sectors and geographies. Increasingly, the principles around things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement are embedded in shareholder expectations, customer expectations, and corporate strategies. The COVID-19 pandemic is reinforcing that focus on sustainability, fueling stakeholder challenges to build things back better, and growing investor public scrutiny of corporate resilience and government resilience in areas ranging from worker health and safety to supply chain resilience amid this global public health disaster. Markets and industry are moving very quickly, putting pressure on governments and regulators to keep pace. Now we have new nationally determined contribution climate plans required by the Paris agreements, and major economies from Japan to the EU to China and Canada are committing to economy-wide carbon neutral goals, meaning the pressure to establish sector-level decarbonization policy frameworks is intensifying. So tonight, we're going to talk about how governments and businesses alike are confronting these challenges. A short-term recovery from the COVID-19 shock, balanced against a longer-term low-carbon transition, and a growing stakeholder focus on sustainability. Whether these goals are in conflict with each other or whether they can be aligned in a mutually reinforcing manner is the key focus for our discussion tonight. So we're going to begin tonight with a keynote address from Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, the Honourable Seamus O'Regan. And it's a great honor for me as a fellow Canadian to introduce the Minister, who represents the riding of St. John South, Mount Pearl, in the beautiful Canadian province of Newfoundland. He became the Natural Resources Minister in 2019, following his election as an MP in 2015 in the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, which was following a long and successful career in media and entertainment. Following Minister O'Regan's remarks, I will introduce the rest of our panel. So Minister, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Robert, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm joining you from Newfoundland, my home province, which is in the furthest east part of Canada. It's affectionately known as the Rock, and it is a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic. So, Ohayo gozaimasu. I want to thank the Eurasia Group for organizing this. I think this is an important and I think timely conference, and we meet at an historic moment as we start to see the end game of a global pandemic that strained the ability of nations to manage. In the course of the last 12 months, our world has changed. The global pandemic has forced our communities apart. Its cost has been monumental, and it's been measured not only in dollars and yen, but also in quality and quantity of lives. It has exposed global vulnerabilities and inequalities with job losses that have been disproportionately borne by women, youth, as well as marginalized groups such as immigrants, racialized people, and persons with disabilities. And while many of the jobs lost at the start of the pandemic have been recouped, the road ahead remains pretty challenging. Here in Canada and elsewhere, we expect a hard winter. But on the other side, spring is coming. Vaccines are coming. As we cautiously emerge from this global pandemic, governments around the world must continue to support people and businesses. The questions facing our government and governments around the world are pretty straightforward. Can we be smart enough to keep finding solutions that make our traditional sources of energy more sustainable through carbon capture and storage, through evolving clean technologies? Can we be thorough enough to ensure that we don't overlook the solutions that are right under our noses, like home and commercial retrofits? Can we be thoughtful enough to cut through the noise and the buzzwords and the politically motivated declarations to ensure that people, energy workers and their families, aren't left behind. In Canada, our energy sector and the many businesses and communities that it supports has faced dual crises. You got COVID-19 and you've got the impact of a global price war that has left the price of oil at rock bottom. I often say that energy in Canada it's like our family business. It's something that we are really good at. We've been at it a long time, and our abundant resources are the engine of our economic prosperity. We are the fourth largest producer of oil in the world, the fourth largest producer of natural gas in the world. We're the second largest producer of hydroelectricity. We're a global leader in solar and wind power, as well as smart grid storage technologies and carbon capture. We are a tier 1 nation for nuclear energy. And we're a driver of clean hydrogen production, fuel cell technologies, biofuels, and the minerals that are critical to powering a clean energy future. Canada also finds itself highly exposed to the greatest challenge, and I think perhaps opportunity of our age, which is combating climate change. As a northern nation, we face serious impacts from climate change. A 2019 government report confirmed that Canada's climate is warming twice as fast as the global average, and that we face serious risks such as coastal erosion, thawing permafrost, increasing in heat waves and droughts and flooding. It also noted risks to critical infrastructures and food security are already being felt, in particular for the Indigenous peoples, low-income citizens, and also our northern coastal and remote communities. This is an existential threat. There's no question about whether we address this threat. The only question is how. How do we meet our needs, power our cities, power our towns, heat our homes, grow our economy while producing fewer emissions? These questions are difficult, but they're ones that we got to answer. So today I want to do two things. I'm going to give you a realistic outline of where Canada's resource economy is today and where it's heading tomorrow. And then I'm going to tell you how Canada's energy and natural resources will play a critical role in the development and operation of tomorrow's sustainable green economy. Let me make one thing very clear. For Canada, the prominence of the petroleum sector in our economy doesn't mean that we hide from the urgency of a change in climate. It means that we have the wherewithal, financial and otherwise, to act boldly. And we are. Like Japan and a growing coalition of 120 countries around the world, Canada is committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And we have just introduced new legislation that will bind us to our target with 5-year milestones. To get there, we have set out an ambitious climate plan that puts a price on pollution, phases out coal-powered electricity, invests in energy efficiency, builds a nationwide network of charging stations for electric vehicles, looks to nature-based solutions, including planting 2 billion trees, brings clean energy to all parts of our country, and makes investments even during this pandemic to enhance environmental performance and reduce emissions of our oil and gas sector. I would add that these actions are required by both, I believe, ecological urgency and also business necessity. Around the world, we've seen that investors are making clear choices. They're putting their money into industries and jurisdictions that are taking action on climate change, and they are divesting from sectors that they view as not taking action. It's all about ESG. Canadian industry understands the direction that markets are moving in, and our industries are following the money. They are already taking action to make our natural resource sectors more sustainable than ever. So now let me tell you the important role I think that existing energy and natural resources are going to play in our emerging green economy. The Canadian petroleum sector is by far our country's largest investor in the clean tech sector. It routinely accounts for more than 70% of all private sector investment in R&D. That's more than $1 billion every year. The energy sector, and Canada's experts in energy, are some of the best positioned innovators in Canada to contribute to our goal of clean energy by 2050. Canada is accelerating new technologies and innovations because many of the breakthroughs that will get us to where we want to go have yet to be invented, or they need help getting to market. And right now, the world only has a portion of the technologies that it needs to get to net zero. That's a huge gap between where we are and where we want to be, which begs the question, how do we bridge that gulf to our clean energy future? Here, again, our natural resources form the foundation. As a mining nation, Canada is ideally positioned to lead the clean energy future through what the World Bank predicts will be a 500% increase in the production of minerals such as graphite, lithium, and cobalt by 2050. Canada is the only nation in the Western Hemisphere that has all of them. It's the only one. These are the minerals and metals that go into everything from solar panels to windmills, from fuel cells to next generation batteries, robotics to electronics. Both the European Green Deal and the EU Industrial Strategy are explicit. Access to these resources is now a strategic security question for making the green and digital transformations a success. Canada shares that view, which is why we're working with allies in North America and around the world to develop a secure supply to these minerals. Canada's forests are also a key strategic resource. With the third largest forest area on the planet, Canada is producing the materials that are used in everything from car parts to mass timber buildings. We are further relying on our forests to help lower carbon emissions through our commitment to plant 2 billion trees over the next 10 years. Part of the answer is natural gas, which can serve as a transition fuel for markets that are moving away from more carbon-intensive energy. And this is particularly true in Asia, where demand for natural gas continues to grow and could displace higher emitting fuels, especially coal. All of which bodes well for Canada as a reliable partner, not just because we're the fourth largest producer of natural gas or because we have the world's fifth largest reserves, but because we have decades of expertise and experience producing natural gas competitively, reliably, and sustainably. New forecasts suggest that British Columbia's LNG industry could create as many as 100,000 good jobs over the next 15 years as we supply global markets and generate new domestic opportunities. As we speak, Canadians are building one of the largest and cleanest LNG facilities of its kind anywhere. It's a $40 billion project called the LNG Canada Project. It will emit half the GHG emissions as those from similar facilities anywhere in the world. What's more, other Canadian LNG projects plan to take environmental performance even further, such as the proposed wood fiber facility, which would also be fully electric, powered by renewable hydroelectricity, and slash emissions by 90%. Our LNG facilities on our west coast are about 10 shipping days to Asia, which actually makes us closer than some traditional suppliers from the Middle East and Africa. On our east coast, where I am, a fully loaded LNG tanker would be able to reach Europe in as little as 6 days, the shortest distance to Europe from any North American LNG project. Those same tankers would be able to reach South American ports 2 days faster than those from the US Gulf Coast. Quite simply, Canadian natural gas offers a path to move us in the right direction on carbon emissions while allowing prosperity to grow around the world. And there are tremendous opportunities in carbon capture, use, and storage to lower emissions even further. In fact, 4 of the world's largest demonstration projects in carbon capture are in Canada. These technologies allow Canada to hone in on some of the hardest to decarbonize industries, like steel, cement, fertilizer, reducing emissions, increasing competitiveness. CCUS also provides the opportunity to capitalize on our natural gas sector to produce clean hydrogen, turning harmful emissions into harmless water vapor. And we are working with Japan and other countries through the Clean Energy Ministerial Hydrogen Initiative to see the world take advantage of hydrogen's vast potential. According to the latest estimates, global production of hydrogen will increase at least tenfold in the coming decades, accounting to close to a quarter of all the energy used around the world by 2050, and creating an industry valued at as much as $11.7 trillion a year. To capture the full range of hydrogen's potential, we'll soon be releasing a hydrogen strategy for Canada, a strategy that will serve as a catalyst for investment in strategic partnerships and make us a top 3 producer of hydrogen. There's also the potential for increased safe use of nuclear power. In particular, Canada is looking to small modular reactors, SMRs, as an important piece of our green recovery. Canada is ideally positioned to lead on SMRs. We're amongst a small elite group of tier 1 nations that have the full spectrum of nuclear capabilities, from building reactors to manufacturing fuel to conducting nuclear research and development. ever-growing capacity in wind and solar, lower emitting oil and gas, clean technologies developed with critical minerals, natural solutions to lower emissions, new hydrogen and nuclear technologies. The possibilities are as vast and numerous as the resources that cover our world, but there is a cautionary note as well. As we kickstart the work to combat climate change, we cannot leave people behind. We cannot leave behind traditional energy workers and their families. We can't leave behind energy producing countries or regions. We cannot sustain this vital work unless we also commit to inclusivity. Because those who are left behind will cling to the familiar, and they will choose governments rooted in the status quo. They will resist the urgency of this climate crisis. They will resist the change that is vital to confronting them, and they will resist the need for governments to be ambitious because they're not included. So encouraging citizens to be a part of the change in their homes, in their places of work, involving people in a meaningful way and in a very effective way. Those little things add up every day. And that's how things that seem so daunting, like combating climate change, can suddenly appear more achievable. There's only one way we're going to get there, and that's by working together, by looking out for one another. So let me close as I began by emphasizing the importance of this moment. We are going through tough times. Winter is here, but spring is coming, and things will get better. If this year has taught us anything, it has taught us that so much can change in a short period of time, but it is up to us to make sure that the change is for the better. So let's use this time to lay the foundation for a better future, a future where we achieve our common mission, a net zero economy by 2050, a global economy that continues to grow and prosper, and a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. Globally, we have the opportunity right now to get things right, to do right by our children and our grandchildren. I believe that. Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Minister Regan. We are very grateful for your insights, and thank you for joining us from the Rock in the Atlantic Ocean, and we appreciate the perspective. Let me now introduce our three panelists. I'm very honored to be joined by the following distinguished leaders. We have Mr. Yoshida Kenichiro, Director, Chairman, President, and CEO of Sony Corporation. We have Ms. Dawn Farrell, who is the President and CEO of TransAlta Corporation, it's a leading global electric power and energy provider. And we have Mr. Maeda Tadashi, Governor of the Japan Bank for International Cooperation. For our key panel discussion tonight, we're going to focus on two areas, building on the minister's comments. The first is a discussion of ongoing efforts by governments and businesses around the world to build it back better post-COVID. And I'd like to hear from our speakers about how their respective organizations see this challenge. The second focal point will be discuss the role of ESG, environment, social, and governance investing, and how it's shaping business strategies and pathways to sustainability. So our format tonight is I'm going to ask each speaker to make opening comments of about 3, 4, or 5 minutes, starting with our first topic about building it back better. So I'd like to ask Yoshida-san to begin, and I'll pass it over to you for your comments. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, RJ, for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be part of this multinational discussion. The theme of sustainability is timely and relevant to all of us. This is especially true in 2020, a year in which the sustainability of people, society, and the planet has been challenged. People and society globally have been and continue to be affected by COVID-19. And social justice movements, best exemplified by Black Lives Matter, have seriously brought into question the true meaning of diversity and inclusion. I believe these events have led each of Sony's 110,000 employees to take a moment to think about how we live and why we exist. Amid these difficult circumstances, the need for our digital entertainment offerings, such as games, music, and movies, has increased. And I am hopeful this has helped our employees to realize the true impact of our purpose, which is to fill the world with emotion through the power of creativity and technology. This purpose has supported the sustainability of our company until now, and will continue to do so. For the planet, which is vital for people and society, this year we have seen natural disasters such as floods, wildfires, and heat waves, as Ms. Origa mentioned, occur frequently around the world, further bringing the sustainability of the planet into question. Despite the ongoing threat of COVID-19, the issue of climate change is much more structural and much longer lasting. So we need to leverage the collective response to COVID-19 and direct our unified spirit to ensuring the sustainability of the planet. The pandemic has changed people's working styles and way of thinking. As for myself, I made 4 trips to overseas cities in 5 weeks between January and mid-February, but have not gone abroad since. Major industries events in Barcelona, Seattle, and Sun Valley, in which I normally participate, either canceled or taken online. As for Sony, currently only 30% of employees in Japan come to the office each day, while almost all employees in the United States are working from home. And production automation in our TV and the PlayStation 5 factories has continued to evolve as well. These changes brought on by COVID-19 are here to stay. And it's important that we don't simply return to the past. Transforming these changes to contribute to the sustainability of the planet is exactly what Build It Back Better is all about. To tackle the issue of planet sustainability, governments and businesses need to implement long-term initiatives that can withstand political election cycles or company quarterly earnings. I believe that ESG investments can encourage business leaders to have a more long-term perspective. Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts on sustainability and Build It Back Better. I'll pass it back to RJ.
Yoshida-san, thank you very much for those comments. Let's now turn from one side of Canada to the other, to Don, who's joining us tonight, I believe, from Alberta in Canada's west. Don, over to you.
Thanks very much for this, RJ, and thanks to the GZERO Summit. I can say that even though we are in COVID and we're coping with being in our homes, I would have much rather have come to Japan, and because I was there last year and it was really a lot of fun to do that. Thank you, Minister O'Regan, for those notes. And let me talk about, I'm here in Alberta, which is the western side of Canada. We're in the electricity business here in Canada, United States, and Western Australia. We're certainly impacted by the virus like you. We've just had to move all of our people back home again for a month of quarantine in our area. So we really are learning about technology and how to change. When I think about Build It Back Better in my sector, in the electricity sector, and we serve mostly large oil and gas customers here in Alberta. So to give perspective on that, the oil and gas industry is about half of the load in the province. So if we don't build to the vision that Minister O'Regan talked about, where our oil and gas community becomes our hydrogen community, becomes a community of selling oil that's somehow uses technologies like CCS to offset its emissions. We really don't have a business in Alberta, and we start to have to think about doing things quite differently. So when we look at what Building Back Better looks like, we actually take the lessons of the virus, and I think the number one lesson that we take is the bend the curve. Bend the curve. So I've been working in climate change for 35 years. I made the first investments in Canada and in wind. I've grown a great big wind portfolio. We have quite a diversified portfolio at TransAlta. But it took us a long time, to do that. It took 20 years to build a wind business. It took 25 years to build a gas business. Our coal business will be shut down next year. It'll have had a 50-year run. And interestingly enough, our hydro business is 110 years old, and it looks like it's got another couple of hundred years ahead of it. So what's been interesting about the electricity sector is some old technologies have survived over centuries and will survive over centuries. And now there's a sunset on coal. For us, our greenhouse gas emissions were 42 million tons. In 2005, there'll be 12.5 million tons by the end of next year. So we have really bent the curve to date on greenhouse gas emissions, and we've done that while keeping electricity prices very reasonable here in Alberta. So when I look at Building It Back Better, I actually do see in the future quite a collaboration between business people and government. I don't think there's a way for us to just have the market give us the signals that need to happen to get to the kinds of investments that we need to make in the future. I think it is some sort of collaboration with government, because pricing, frankly, of carbon reductions come from government. Governments set that path, they set that time frame, they set that price. And I do see figuring out how to get technologies that wouldn't otherwise come into play, let's say in the 2030s or the 2040s, built today. So I'll give you two examples. In our fleet today, we had 9 coal plants. By the end of next year, we'll have shut 6 of them down. 3 will be converted to gas. 1 is having a makeover, and it's going to become a combined cycle plant by 2023. And I think in that 2025 to 2030 timeframe, we'll be putting CCS on that particular unit, and maybe converting another unit with gas and CCS, so that by the end of this decade, most of the gas that we'll be producing in Alberta will be offset by carbon, by carbon capture and storage. But to do that, I need the minister to work together with the Alberta government here and people like myself to figure out how to do that now. Because we can wait until the price signal is there. We can look for really innovative finance solutions, which are very difficult to do if you can't get a stream of payments for carbon reductions. Or we can work together and say, okay, let's take what you otherwise would have done in 2040 and do it in 2020. Now, why do I think that's important? Because, we're basically moving up the cost curve and moving things ahead. I think the virus has taught us a lot about that. You have to do what you can do when you can do it, because there's something always ahead of you that's harder than you thought that can take you off track. If we had all thought in 2010 that we were going to face 2 years of being at home in 2019 and 2020, what would we have done differently? Well, I'm pretty sure we would have had all our IT systems in place. We would have already been using video conferencing. We'd already been letting a lot of our people work at home. We wouldn't have been having a big heart attack because women wanted to work at home. We just said, yeah, go do it. We need you there anyway. We would have gotten all these cars off the road. We would not have built all the overpasses and highways that we did in Alberta. We would have not built big highways, and we would already be set up, and we would have saved a bunch of financial resources because we would have looked ahead. So I think building it back together is collaboration. It's taking risk on what you think the future is going to bring, but more importantly, it's doing things today so that you've got flexibility in the future to face whatever that future is. And the future is always uncertain. We now know that for sure. None of us expected this. and we don't know what to expect next year. So that's how we're looking at it. And we look forward to collaborating with the minister, and I'm glad to see him on this call. So it's great.
Thank you, Don. Let me now turn to Maeda-san. We've known each other for a long time. It's great to see you, and I look forward to hearing your perspective as leader of JBIC on these issues. Thank you.
To everybody.
I think you're on mute, Mr.
I'm very,
There, thank you.
yes, I'm very
Go
honored
ahead.
to join this panel as a very long-term friend of the Eurasia Group. As a governor of JBIC, I'm personally very closely watching the decision-making procedure of the government. Also, that we are actively engaged for restoration of the economy for the first 6 months since COVID-19 happened in Japan very seriously in March of 2012, 2020, and to September of this year. This is we are now more focused on that the restoring that the economy and industry. Like we are now have been providing long-term working capital to that very affected industry, in particular in the airline industry and manufacturers and so on. But since September, and the new government, new administration in Japan, Mr. Suga administration has been installed in September, we are using this COVID-19 crisis as a sort of chance to transform the ecosystem and economy of Japan. And we are most using our technology, cutting-edge technology to the more long-term perspectives. And as you know, the Prime Minister Suga delivered the keynote speech at a session of Diet in September. And he committed clearly that the net zero emission of net zero emission and the decarbonization by 2050. This, as a close observer and a contributor to the decision-making policy of Japan, this is a very revolutionary for Japan, because we have not made a very practical roadmap to achieve the goal by 2050. We have not the building block to achieve this goal. Nonetheless, Mr. Suga made his political decisions to make a very strong commitment to net zero by 2050. Now that we are now trying to make a roadmap using all of the policy measures, financial measures, and so on, to how to achieve the goal. This is our challenges to come. But now, obviously, that everybody talk about green and combating climate change and the decarbonization. This is a very challenging task. It's not an easy job. And for example, that on the mobility sector, Japanese government will announce that no new sales of the conventional vehicles by 2035. But at the same time, that how to measure that the emission of GHG from the mobile. And in the manufacturing, that the battery, for example, that electric vehicle will emit more CO2 than normal diesel car. So that's the key, is that how to make the really clean battery and more energy efficient battery, and also that using a mix of the other automobile like FCV. That's very important. And also, Japanese government commit to use the hydrogen as a driving force to achieve this goal. Last week, the new organization in Japan has been launched, named the Japan Hydrogen Association. 88 companies joined this association along the sectors. And I delivered the keynote speech at the session, and JBIC is very strongly committed to support the transforming and using hydrogen, and also that we need to make a clear roadmap. For the time being, we may use so-called blue hydrogen, produced from natural gas and so on. It's at a transition period, but absolutely that our eventual goal is green hydrogen. But its cost is still very high and expensive. Therefore, we need to make the hydrogen as affordable cost, so that we need to invite a sector like steel industry and cement industry, which has not used the hydrogen yet. Otherwise, for example, that if you produce hydrogen out of natural gas, in terms of cost, obviously that hydrogen is more expensive than natural gas. It's very simple. Therefore, that we need to boost the demand of hydrogen. Otherwise, we cannot make it affordable. So this is a very daunting task. At the same time, we argue at Davos this year that many people, more than 1 billion population, is not connected yet to that source of power, electricity. That we do not leave behind those people. So that we have some more balancing approach to achieve the two goals both in SDG, but conflicting each other. Therefore, that we need to be engaged with that government and the people in developing countries. We have to assist them to change its policy, because many Asian developing countries still use coal as a source of power, but it's not easy to change its policy because of the poverty they face. Therefore, that we need to engage with them and support them, both financially and also from the point of policy making. So that this is my task, to make balancing between that goal of for reduction of poverty and also the combating climate change.
Maeda-san, thank you very much for your comments about JBIC's participation and sustainability going forward. For our second round of comments, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the topic of capital markets and the role of the financial community that all of you deal with every day in ESG, the environment, social, governance, investing. And how have you worked with shareholders and with your banks, and what role do they play in building it back better and evolving your businesses towards a more sustainable footprint? Don, maybe I'll start with you, and if you could give us maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll turn to other speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think ESG has really become a code for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I hope it broadens out over time and we really get the benefits of all of what it stands for, which is the E, the environment, the S, the social, and the governance. But what we found is in our strategy, we've been serious about ESG for a long time, over 30 years. I've been working on carbon policy for a long time. But what we found is you really got to put your money where your mouth is, and you got to show progress against your targets. So ESG investors don't actually expect you to get away from carbon. They are very practical. They know that we need to supply energy and electricity to economies. We need it to be low priced. We need it to make us competitive. If you want to include people, they all have to have jobs, and if you have big disruptions and they're too fast and people don't have jobs, you get a huge upset. And what we found is by showing substantive and real progress in our strategy and looking ahead and showing how our strategy goes from, like I said, 42 million tons to 12.5 million tons. And by showing that we've bent the curve away from coal, we'll be off coal completely by the end of next year, towards natural gas, towards wind, towards solar. Our ESG investors love us, and they They like us because our reports are extremely honest. We set our goals and then we achieve them. We use the highest standard in terms of reporting. So our reporting is very understandable and very scientific and very above base, so that they know that if we reduced a ton of carbon, we really did reduce it. But fundamentally, what they like is they see a plan, they see us achieving our plan, they can count on us achieving our plan, and so they see our future carbon liabilities diminishing over time, and that gives them confidence to invest in our strategy, because fundamentally investors are about that future cash flow. And if they believe that future cash flow is not going to be there, they don't want to give you capital. And if they believe it's going to be there and that you have ways of growing your future cash flow by making investments, they do want to be with you. And so we've just found a tremendous turnaround in probably the last year, where a lot of analysts are excited about our story. They're doing analysis on it, and they're really quite surprised at our ability to really put our money where our mouth is along a spectrum of things, including we will have 40% female across the organization by 2030. We have 33% women on our board. We have women in major decision-making roles through the company. The community investments we make, the way that we work with our people, it all counts, right? So I think it's working, and you just have to do the work.
Don, thank you very much. And Amanda-san, maybe you can pick up where Don left off in terms of investor confidence. How do you combine an approach that delivers the traditional value to investors, but also embraces sustainability, especially not just climate, but other areas of ES and G that Don mentioned?
Yes, sometimes ESG is referred to the very simple and some misunderstanding that, for example, it's divestment. But divestment is only one aspect of the ESG. So that, for example, that we are now, as this area, that we are now supporting the policy change of the developing countries. I paid a visit to Vietnam in May of last year. I had a meeting with the Prime Minister, Nguyen Xuan Phuc, and I made my proposal to support the energy transformation. I want to use more gas, natural gas, for the time being than the coal, and also that if the Vietnamese government introduce the cutting-edge technology, we are supporting more. And this is really affected the policy of the Vietnamese government. They accommodated already that my proposal to the energy best mix in Vietnam. This is my engagement policy. And also that we are now working on that, not just on the green, but also the other impact investment. So that I did the speech at the Impact Investment Summit last year in Switzerland. And this is we need to utilize, maximize that the power of the market, and to set forth some direction for the ESG. This is a very much movement, national movement, and not just only the policy base, but also that all power of market to shift that the wave trend from the conventional investment to the more impact and green investment. This is our commitment to ESG.
Thank you, Amanda-san. So Yoshida-san, your company, Sony, was recognized by the Wall Street Journal as the world's most sustainable company. So congratulations to you and your employees for that achievement. Can you tell us about your journey to that recognition and to building your sustainability strategy, and how you worked with your shareholders in that process?
Thank you, RJ, for touching on the Wall Street Journal rankings. It was a pleasant surprise and an honor to be selected as the world's most sustainably managed company. And this is something our employees can be very proud of. I believe we have been recognized not only for our sustainability activities, but also the openness and the transparency with which we conduct them. I'd like to share my thoughts on the importance of dialogue with investors about ESG. There are a number of metrics, scorings, and frameworks for ESG investments. Sony too follows internationally recognized frameworks such as GRI and TCFD. Earlier, I mentioned that ESG investment can encourage business leaders to have a more longer-term perspective. In addition to this, I believe the most important thing for a company is to have a story within these frameworks that clearly shows how they are contributing to the sustainability of people, society, and the planet. For example, at Sony, there is our CMOS sensor semiconductors. These make up 10% of Sony's revenue, yet producing them accounts for 70% of Sony's consumption. Although we are working to reduce it to achieve zero environmental footprint and 100% renewable energy. However, our story here is that Sony's CMOS sensors are components that will help reduce environmental impact in the long run through productivity enhancement brought about by IoT devices and the contribution we can make to the evolution of mobility. For autonomous driving, CMOS sensors are indispensable, and this is why we heavily invest in R&D in this area. It is a responsibility of corporate leaders like myself to communicate these stories to investors so that they understand the contribution being made to sustainability and that it will eventually lead to shareholder return. I believe this will in turn lead to an increase in responsible investment. These are my thoughts on the importance of dialogue with investors about ESG. Back to you, RJ.
Thank you, Yoshida-san. It's very interesting. And I think it's really challenging when we look at Eurasia Group's clients, both in the corporate side and the investor side, to how do they really handle this challenge that you mentioned at the beginning of your comments about looking at long-term investments that all three speakers mentioned to support sustainability while dealing with the pressure of quarterly earnings cycles and elections. So Don, what is your secret? How do you manage that balance between the very short term and the very long term? I'm sure there's no magic bullet, but maybe you can take a stab at it.
I think when I first started in this industry, we used to think in 50-year increments when we made investments, 50 to 60, if you can believe it, and then 25 to 30. And now when we're working on our strategy, we think in 20-year increments, and that's 4 cycles. And we think less. Sorry to say this, Minister O'Regan. We think less about who's in power and more about who's putting them in power and what the people are that are putting them in power think. So we're thinking a lot more about what are sort of these fundamental values that people have that they want, that despite who they get to represent them in a political sense, they still want that. And so we're starting to think about what kinds of policies will sustain themselves through various whims of the electric. So, for example, if you look at climate change, for example, and you look at carbon, and you look at carbon pricing, it should sustain itself through any government anywhere in Canada, because I think people fundamentally believe that something has to be done to reduce Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of people are pretty positive about some sort of pricing regime. And so we spend a lot of our time on our policy side working across all parties to talk about how can we find ways to price carbon reductions so that we can make 20-year bets that will last that will be lasting, and then there'll be other technologies that will follow behind. So I'll just use one quick example. Took me a long time to convince our company to invest in wind, right? We produced electricity by coal. Who wants to build a wind farm when you produce electricity by coal? But what happened was the Canadian government put in place a program where they subsidized wind investments with about a $10 cost. And if you could get a long-term PPA from another level of government plus that $10, you could start building wind. And at the beginning of that program, it was $150 a megawatt hour to make wind, and today it's 40. I just won a wind farm last year that I'm building at $40. So in the period of 20 years, we saw wind costs come down from 150 to 40. We saw the same thing on solar. Solar went from actually 450 to we've seen projects at $20. So when I look ahead and I talk to governments around carbon emissions reductions, the first thing is, will this trend last because it's what the people want? My view is the people want it. Doesn't matter if they live in Alberta, BC, Ontario, Newfoundland, people want politicians to have some sort of regime for carbon. Then what's the most efficient way to get carbon reduction projects built? You price it. What's the second most efficient way? You provide long-term pricing stability. When you do that, you get low-cost money. These guys will line up and give us 2-3% money for 20-year contracts. So we try to find mechanisms that cross over any person who wants to run the country, and that makes sense for the economy. And it always goes back to the same fundamental things. People want the electricity, they want it to be reliable, they absolutely do not want to pay a ton for it, and they want it to be green. And so how do we collaborate with those people that get the privilege of leading the country every 4 years to find a way to get those outcomes to occur, and then we try to drive our strategy into that.
Dawn, thank you very much. So Mayada-san, I'm going to give you the last word here. We have 3 minutes left, but there's one comment you made that I would like to follow up on, and maybe just ask you to give a short thought on this. You mentioned the end of sales of the internal combustion engine in Japan, passenger vehicles, and of course other countries are also looking at no more new car sales, and that makes me think about jobs and employees, right? And the challenge ahead for Japan and other countries, Canada, of what happens when these old jobs disappears. And Minister Reagan mentioned the energy workers. Again, we only have a little bit of time, but I'd love to hear your quick reaction to that question of how should the government handle this challenge?
Well, this is a very daunting task because of Japan's economy very heavily rely on the automobile industry. But therefore, that's only that car makers are not able to accommodate everything. Therefore, that we need to support us, car industry as a system, so that for to support. So that is the ecosystem. As I said earlier, that in manufacturing the battery, they emit more greenhouse gas emitted, not just running the car. Therefore, that there's some responsibility has to be taken by the producer, manufacturers of battery as well, and also that's the makers of raw material as well. So that we need to underpin that car industry. Also, that some of policy of subsidy of government as well to support the for industry and to make the ecosystem. Otherwise, it is not able to make it sustainable. That's the key point. And also that, let me talk about CCS. Everybody said that CCS is very important, but not just if it's just only that carbon capture and storage. From the viewpoint of financial, this is a cost. So CCS does not create any value. Therefore, it's not affordable. Therefore, that we need to monetize. Very ironically, we need to monetize carbon, and that's otherwise it is not achievable. So that because the cost is still high, and also that only that by subsidizing the government, this is not sustainable. So that we need to make it happen, so that for industry may have to align all together, and also that make value and monetize the carbon. That's ironically, but this is very important.
Wonderful. Maeda-san, thank you so much. Don, thank you. Yoshida-san, Minister Reagan, thank you very much. You've got lots of inputs here from these business leaders about what Canada and other governments should take on, and I'm sure they're eager to continue the dialogue with you. So thanks to all of our speakers. We're going to conclude now, but however, we are going to start a VIP roundtable in about 10 minutes. So stay tuned for that. But that concludes the session, and I wish all of you a good day and thank you for your time. Goodbye.